In this demonstration, we're going to take a look at how we can enable two-factor authentication using Duo when we want to secure the Firepower Device Manager. So we have the Firepower Device Manager here, or FDM for short. We also will need a couple of other components, so if you are following along, just make sure that you have the following prerequisites in place. As part of this demonstration, we're going to use the Radius application, so that will involve having an authentication proxy, a very lightweight application installed within the environment somewhere. As part of this demonstration, we're just going to install that on the identity source, in this case an Active Directory domain controller, and we also have ISE in the mix as well. So ISE is in play as the Radius server because what we're going to do is we're going to create the required attribute value pairs for our users so that they can authenticate to the device manager. So first of all, what we need to do is we'll start off with FDM, and we need to log in and go to System Settings, Management Access. And we have straight away two different configuration entities that we can look at. So we've got one for HTTPS, which is essentially what we're looking at now, the graphical user interface connection. And then we also have management access for SSH connectivity as well. So what we're going to focus on today is we're going to focus on HTTPS. The other settings we don't need to play around with. However, if you wanted to, you could further restrict access to HTTPS and SSH via subnets and IP addresses. You could specify a specific data interface that should be used for management access, and as well then we're going to certificates for management as well. We'll just focus on AAA configuration today and HTTPS, as I said. So what we need to do is we need to either create or specify the ISE server as the Radius server. So what we need to do is, let's just I don't think I have one, so what's this one? Let's have a look. Yeah, so let's just create one for the purpose of this demonstration. So we'll call this ISE Radius, and then we'll ROM support, dynamic authorization we can leave as it is because that's only for remote access VPNs. And then what we'll do is we'll add our server in here. So we'll call this ISE server, and 192.168.99.7 for this lab, and we'll leave the authentication port as it is, 1812, and timeout will just change to 60 seconds and gives us that time to authenticate. Our secret key, part of this demo, I've just specified the Cisco. If you like, if you are doing this in a live environment, obviously make sure that that's a more secure password. That password or shared secret will need to be shared between ISE and the FDM as well, so just make a note of that mentally, as we will need that as well. So we'll just specify that ISE server now that we've created it, and this pretty much completes our Radius server group. So we'll go ahead. We got the opportunity to test, but we're not going to do that now because the other components are not configured. We can try that afterwards. For now, we'll just specify the ISE Radius server, and again you get the option here to test as well. Authentication with local. So essentially what this means is we have two options here. I believe there might have used to be maybe free in the past, but we have two options here. Essentially, we have the option to authenticate with the local, so the admin credentials locally before we try the external server, or we can flip that round and authenticate with the external server first, and then only if the external server is unreachable or authentication fails on that, then we can drop back to local as well. So we can leave that as before external, It doesn't really matter in our case for this demonstration, and we'll just go ahead and press save, and we'll come back to that afterwards. So I'm just going to drag this over here now, and what you're looking at here is essentially an authentication proxy on a demo machine, which is actually connected to a demo Active Directory domain controller as well, where we'll pull the authentication, the credentials from. So this one is already kind of configured, so we have our connectivity to our demo Active Directory. We have down here we have the Radius Server Auto with our integration key, secret key, and API host. That matches back to those three components match back to the Duo admin panel, and we'll take a look at that in a moment. And then our Radius IP is pointing towards ISE, and then our Radius secret will also be configured in ISE as well. And then for the client, we're going to use the Radius server, and we also are going to pass through all attributes, and then we've got our default 1812 for our authentication port there as well. So what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and just save this, because I'm not too sure if it's been saved already, and then I'm just going to stop and restart the Duo Authentication Proxy itself as well. Okay, so that's now successfully started as well. So let's just go back to Duo right quick so we can see what I was referring to. If you hadn't already been able to add the application, what we would do is go to Applications, Protect an Application, just like this. And then what we would do is we would search for Radius 2FA, and then you'd click Protect on that. So that's what I've already done for this demonstration. And so if we click on this application here, as I said, the iKey, SKey, and API hostname, they're added to the Duo Authentication Proxy. And then we do have the option to specify group policies or application policies above the global policy, but for this demonstration we've just left everything as default pretty much, so we're just using the global policy there. One thing to point out just before we go to ISE is you'll see here as a little reminder, basically with a link to tell us that we need to make sure that the Radius user accounts match the AV pairs, essentially attribute value pairs, before we can kind of complete this. And then you can click help and we'll get a instructions page here, which is quite useful, and this just gives us the attribute value pairs. So we've got three, one for admin privileges, one for read-write privileges, and then another one for read-only privileges as well. So these will become more apparent when we take a look at the configuration in ISE. If you are using a different Radius server, then do make sure, as it points out here, the attribute value pair itself, the name, the attribute name may be spelt slightly differently or used slightly differently depending on what sort of Radius server you are using, but in Cisco ISE ours should be Cisco-AV-pair. So again, we'll take a look at that as well. So if we just go over to our ISE node, which is already on, and we go to administration, and we first of all, let's take a look at network devices. We need to make sure that our FDM is in there. So we do have the FDM in here. I'll just change that name because we was using this as a different device. we're still using the default password. So yeah, I'll just change the name for the purpose of this. So we'll call this FDM demo. We'll leave the rest as it is, secret as it is as well, and we'll save that. We do need to make sure that the device, the Firepower Device Manager device, is added to ISE as well as a network device. And then what we need to do once we've done that is we'll go to External Identity Sources under Administration. And then what we'll do is we'll go to, we've already got our demo Active Directory joined, and then we just need to click on Radius Token and add, and let's give this a name. So we'll give this Demo Duo. Let's call it Demo Duo FDM. And then what we need to do is we need to specify the host IP of the Duo Auth proxy. So in our case, it's going to be 192.168.99.20, and our secret was Cisco. So this is a secret that's configured on the auth proxy, and then we've got our authentication port there that we'll leave as is. Our server timeout, we'll just change that to 60 seconds, so that's not timing out beforehand. And then everything else we can leave as it is. So we'll just go ahead and press submit on that to save. So now we have our Demo Duo FDM in there. And then if we just quickly have a look at identity source sequences, let's make sure, let's just add a new one for this identity source. So we'll call this FDM ID source. The certificate authentication we'll leave as it is, and let's have a look. Duo FDM, and let's just add our demo Active Directory in there. And then lastly, under advanced, we'll just treat as if the user is not found and proceed to the next door in the sequence, if that's the case, and we'll submit. So we'll save that. And now what we can do is we'll go to policies, and let's create a new policy set. So we'll call this FDM demo policy set, or PS, and we'll filter this down. So we'll say if device type is a firewall, which I think I specified it as. Let's use that. We'll use default network access, save that, and then we'll go into the actual policy set we've just created. And then for the authentication policy, we'll just use the default, but if you recall our ID store that we created, let's use that. So we'll FDM identity source, we'll use that one. And under options, let's do if user's not found, let's just continue, and then the rest we'll leave as is. And then under the authorization, what we'll do is we actually need a new profile. So what we'll do is let's add a new one. So we'll just leave that as authorization rule 1, and let's specify our domain. So we'll specify our external domain and domain users within that, and we'll tell them to use, let's create a new authorization profile. And again, let's just see now. There we go. So we've got what we need there. So we'll do FDM read only, our attribute value pair. So we'll start off going to Cisco, and then we should be able to see Cisco AV pair. So you can either search it, but it's right there, or you can just find it in the list. And then what we need to do, our So if we just go back to our documentation, our value is going to be the read-only one. That's the one that we're going to use for this demonstration. So I'll just go ahead and put that in there, and then we're good with that. So let's just submit that. Go back to our policy sets, FDM, and then to our authorization policy, and then now we'll switch this out for the one we've just created, which is FDM read only. So let's save that now, and then we should be good now. Actually, from the ISE perspective, I think everything should be in place. So if we just go to live logs now, and let's go back to our FDM, and let's see if we can test this now. And just before we continue, I just want to go back to the authentication proxy. I need to make sure that I change this to use the AD client, the primary auth. Yeah, I'll save that. Again, I'll just stop and start the services again. Okay, cool, that should be fine now. And I'll just go back to my policy sets. I just want to double check something else. And we'll change this to yep, that should be fine. So I'll just close that without saving. Let's go back to our live logs now, and let's see if we can actually test now. While we're on the FDM, let's just make sure that we deploy the changes so that we can successfully test once we're done with the rest of the configuration. So we'll just deploy that now, and we can just watch the status of that if we want under the pending changes, and we'll give that a few minutes to complete. So with the configuration now pushed on the FDM, the configuration in place on the authentication proxy, and the configuration in place on ISE, we can now test this and see if we get the results that we are expecting. So we have the Radius live logs open on ISE. So let's just go ahead now and test with our user. So if I just enter the username now and the password, we do get the so even though it still says connecting because we're using Radius server auto, if I just go across now and show you Duo, I can approve that request. And there you go. So you can see as soon as I approve that request, you can see that it's being authenticated successfully, and we should be able to verify that in the logs. So yes, so you can see here it's hit our authentication and authorization rule, and we should have the authorization profile. So if I click onto more details for that log and just go to the bottom, we can see that the Cisco AV pair should have been sent as well. So Duo should now be in place for two-factor authentication when authenticating to the FDM GUI. So now let's actually test that. So let's get our FDM open, and then we'll just bring the phone up so you can see that as well. Just move it while I log in. So let's just log in now with demo 1, and if you remember, it should be a read-only user once we log in. So what I'll do is let me just press login there, and then if we open Duo, we can see that it's asking us if we're logging into the Radius application with demo 1. So I'll press approve, and there you go, you can see now that we are logging in successfully. If I just put that over there, you can also see that we have successfully got this read-only user for demo 1. So we are limited in terms of what we can do with this user. So you can see here, role read only user, username demo 1 there. So that's great. So we essentially have configured the Firepower Device Manager with Cisco ISE and Duo for 2-factor authentication.